Um, Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the coaches, my name is Enrique Jauregui. I'm the SLO coordinator for Fresno City College. Our college is located in the Central Valley of California. Jarek, would you like to introduce yourself?
Certainly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jarek Yanyo. I'm from Santa Ana College School of Continuing Education. I'm the founder of the Coaches Group and the Friday SLO Talks. This morning, we have a pleasure to welcome a team from Chaffey College who are going to be talking about Canvas and outcomes. With that, I just would like, I'm going to be posting, before we let our speakers speak, we do have an SLO survey that we would like you to fill out. So I'll post a link to it in the chat just for everyone to participate. We would like to get ready for the fall semester. So this would give us some hopefully some good topics to tackle in the fall. With that, Chaffey team is here. Laura, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jarek. Thank you, Enrique. Thanks for having us. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll introduce ourselves and get started. Move into presenter view. Good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Picklesheimer. I represent Chaffey College in Rancho Cucamonga. Before we begin, I'd just like to introduce my co-presenters. So Trelisa, you want to take the floor?
Yes, good Friday morning, afternoon, early afternoon. My name is Trelisa Glazatov. I am the credentialing systems designer here at Chaffey. And I'll pop it over to Matt.
Hi, everybody. My name is Matt Morin, and I'm the Dean of Arts, Communication Design, and Work Experience here at Chaffey.
So our presentation today is titled Beyond Grades, Transforming Education with Canvas Credentials and Outcomes. I'm going to start us off with a conversation of it, and then we'll be moving into a discussion on the credentialing aspect. So I'm not going to be checking the chat regularly, so Jarek and Enrique, feel free to pop in if there's a question coming up. I'm happy to stop and discuss. Otherwise, you know, I have time for a Q&A at the end of my over to Trey, and we'll talk about the credentialing aspect of it.
So Laura, I'm sorry, apologies, but this is the second time you broke up, so I don't know what your audio situation is, but just in case there's something that you can address. If not, then you're fine. It's just
okay.
That it seems like we lost a couple of sentences here. No big deal, but you know, if there's something that you can address on your end, that just wanted to let you know.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, sorry to hear that. It might be my internet. So yeah, feel free to let me know if you're missing anything, and I'm happy to repeat it.
Sounds good.
So here's just an overview of the topics that I'll be covering this morning. I'll be providing an overview of ACEs at the college, some of the benefits of assessing ACEs and our history with the ACEs Outcomes Initiative. I'll be providing some examples of ACEs assessments from Chaffey faculty. I'll discuss the alignment process for aligning curriculum to our ACEs ILOs, and then adding those outcomes using Canvas rubrics. I'll be briefly discussing ways that faculty have engaged students in this process. And then, as I mentioned, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A and discussion. So a brief background and overview of ACEs. I want to share here the strategic plan for Chaffey College. This is for 2023 to 2026 as far as learning and completion. So one of the goals the college has, as I'm sure many colleges have across the country, ensure learning and timely completion of students' educational goals. So one of the objectives for accomplishing that is embedding career exploration and connections to career transfer at every stage of the process, from entry to advancement. So that entails not just discussing, career and employability skills in those CTE programs and courses, but in every single course that a student takes at Chaffey. And so that involved this, ambition to change the assessment culture at Chaffey. So part of that process was first identifying those important both academic and employability skills across the curriculum, then working to align those skills or outcomes to the college's institutional learning outcomes. That was really a vital piece, connecting to the institutional learning outcomes that the college already had. And then, of course, scaling it. So part of our way that we scaled this process was to formally incorporate ACEs assessment into the college's program review processes. And so this just provides a timeline of ACEs at Chaffey College and the evolution here. So we first began this conversation back in 2020 during the pandemic, actually. We had a faculty inquiry team survey the top skills that were valued by employers, faculty, students, also alumni. We conducted focus groups, questionnaires, and just got, a lens from both the employers in the region as well as the faculty, students, and those who had recently graduated to explore the ways the college might make clearer connections between the curriculum and those professional employment skills. And so we found, we kind of needed a model to start from. So in 2021, we used the new world of work model. And if you're familiar with that, it identifies, the top 10 21st century skills. There's associated learning outcomes with that. And so Chaffey then created the ACEs from that model. And so ACEs stands for Academic Community Employability Skills. And we implemented an initial pilot assessment run, a little under the radar. We had some faculty that were really interested in starting assessment. So we began official assessment in 2021. In 2022, we had a joint work group from the Outcomes and Assessment Committee and the Academic Senate. We kind of began publicizing and collecting feedback, first on Chaffey's existing institutional learning outcomes. And from that feedback, we revised both the college's ILOs and the existing ACEs to better reflect the college's mission and culture. And so from that, we modified quite a bit and deviated from that new world of work model. We added additional outcomes, and I'll move on to the next slide here. You can see here, these are the 12 ACEs skills that we developed from that 2022 work group. So you can see 21st century skills like communication and critical thinking. We also added 3 additional outcomes. We added social justice, environmental responsibility, and data utilization. So these are the 12 academic, community, and employability skills, or ACEs, that we now have at the college. And so this is just a breakdown of what it looks like. So using the innovation skill as an example, you can see there are 4 associated learning outcomes per ACEs skill. So we have 12 ACEs skills, so that means there are 48 total actual learning outcomes associated with ACEs. So this example here, you can see the learning outcomes for innovation are curiosity, innovative approach, synthesis, and creation. And each ACEs skill is aligned with a Chaffey ILO, or institutional learning outcome. So you can see here that our innovation skill is aligned to the critical thinking and problem solving ILO. And so that alignment was really key to scaling this operation and attaching it and making it associated with those learning outcomes. And so here you can see the full integration of ACEs at the college. For this presentation, for my portion, I'm really focused here on the learning outcomes piece of it. But that is connected to career readiness credentials, which Trey is going to be speaking to. And then you'll see here kind of this third part of the wheel is the program and services review that I mentioned earlier, which allowed us to really scale it across all instructional and counseling programs at Chaffey. And so the benefits for students, I think it can be kind of obvious, that I want to return back to, why we're doing this, right, for the student. So having this model where we're embedding employability skills into every course, into the individual assignments, and into transparent assessment reframes the coursework. So we're intentionally identifying the skills that students are building, not just for their careers, but also their future academic work, for transfer, and for participating in their communities. And so returning to that program review piece, I want to show what we're doing on the department level. So faculty are free to access the 48 total learning outcomes associated with those ACES skills, and I'll show you what that looks like in Canvas in a couple minutes. But as far as programs, the specifications that we outline for program review are here. So each instructional or counseling program is asked to identify at least 3 of those specific learning outcomes across 2 ACES skills. So I have a visualization here to kind of represent what that could look like. This is just one example. I think this is from our geography program. So we have environmental responsibility, one of the skills, and then critical thinking. And then below that, you'll see there's one outcome for environmental responsibility that program identified, and 2 outcomes from critical thinking. So this is just an example of what a program's plan might look like. And so here you'll see Chaffey College organizes its programs across ACCs, which are academic and career communities. And so we have 6 of them here. You can see them on this slide. And so we have participation from all the academic and career communities at the college. So obviously that's a wide gamut. So a few numbers of what's occurred since 2021, when we began official ACES assessment. We performed over 140,000 assessments. And so here you can see the top 3 ACES skills that have been assessed. These top 3 comprise approximately half of those assessments. Obviously, though, every skill has been assessed across the college. So you can see here critical thinking, communication, and digital fluency are currently the top 3 skills that have been assessed at Chaffey by faculty. And so I want to turn here just to discuss, the technical nuts and bolts of it. So how it's done, so how we're integrating these ACES outcomes directly into our Canvas courses. So the first step begins with alignment. You can't really go further unless you're properly aligning your curriculum. So that's really the most vital first step. So selecting from those 48 outcomes that align with your curriculum, and also making sure you're assessing the outcomes identified by your department. So those 3 outcomes that your department has identified as vital to the program. And so when we're thinking of alignment, we've offered a number of training workshops, we have materials, we have an ACES Canvas shell. We just ask faculty, before even looking at the ACES outcomes themselves, just answering the question, what are the general skills that are embedded into your existing curriculum? So one thing we've emphasized is that this does not require you to rewrite your curriculum, right? It doesn't require you to rewrite your course learning outcomes, unless of course you want to, but those still exist. You still have your CLOs in your syllabus. You're still teaching what you've always taught. You do not, again, have to rewrite your curriculum or redo your assignments. It's just looking through, and first, like I said, just prompting an open-ended question of what are the skills that you're most emphasizing in your classes. And so I have a couple examples here of alignments that have been performed. Again, using existing curriculum and using the existing assessments that a professor might already have. And so one example is, let's say, a math course, right? Anytime a student is providing an authentic assessment where they're explaining their process, let's say, for arriving at a solution, that would tie into the critical thinking skill, right? And those particular problem-solving outcomes that we have. Let's say you have an English course, and most English courses involve both essay writing and also peer review of the essay writing. So maybe you ask students to submit a brief reflection on how the peer review process helped improve their writing. So that could tie into that adaptability skill set, right? Making effective use of feedback. And then any course that involves, let's say, a project, a group project, could evaluate the collaboration skill, right? And so there's a number of ways you can assess that collaboration through anonymous peer surveys or written reflections after the fact, or observed observations of the execution of the assigned task or role in that project. And so I'm going to show a couple examples now of what it actually looks like in Canvas. So this first example comes from a colleague's biology course. Oh yeah, Enrique?
Sorry to interrupt you, but just because you're talking about across these disciplines, so these skills transfer through every discipline, like in like you're talking about in the performing arts, right? But what about the other areas such as psychology, geology? How do you incorporate all that into those skills, into those disciplines?
Yes, this counts for every discipline at Chaffey, since the alignment for ACEs is with those institutional learning outcomes.
Okay.
Those are the broader skills that any student, regardless of their major or discipline, is challenged to achieve and master. So skills like critical thinking or communication are across the curriculum.
So you're then aligning those skills or mapping those skills to the institutional learning outcomes?
Yes.
Got
Yes.
you. Got you.
Yeah,
Thank
so
you.
and I can go out during the Q&A, I can pull up some of the previous slides. Every ACEs skill is aligned to one of the 4 institutional learning outcomes at Chaffey. So Chaffey College has 4 institutional learning outcomes. So we can pull up any of the ACEs skills and connect it directly to that institutional learning outcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that's why the program review portion of it's really important, because it honestly required programs to look at those 48 skills and decide which best align. I'll be perfectly honest, you might as a program not necessarily emphasize every single skill, right? So coming from an English background, the English department did not choose to align with data utilization. Not saying that you couldn't use that, let's say if you're doing a research project. So I think certain ACEs skills might stand out for particular programs more than others. And so that was part of the program review process, having programs and departments look at that and look at where they most see alignment and what they want to almost like advertise as their program. This program will emphasize, let's say, your critical thinking skills.
Gotcha. And just one more thing, and sorry to interrupt you because I want to capture the whole notion of what you're describing. Those soft skills or ACEs skills can they also be transferable into the CTE field? Not just, the philosophy department or the English department or what have you. What about the CTE field?
Yes, so every program at Chaffey is integrating ACEs, including our CTE programs, and I think Trey will be able to speak to the discipline-specific credentials, because that's kind of the next phase, right? We have the ACEs, which by definition are more general since they apply across the college. But yeah, we also have discipline-specific outcomes that we're embedding that are career focused as well. So looking at a particular examples, you can kind of see just with this biology example, and I'm going to give an English example as well. This is just meant to represent just a few examples of what faculty are doing across the curriculum. And so you can see here, one thing we really encourage just for any course and any assignment is posting the learning outcomes, right, on the assignment, along with the tasks involved, the resources, the rubric, having the learning outcomes. So you can see here in this example, the first two bullets are kind of the course-specific learning outcomes, right, the CLOs. And then for this instructor, they have a little kind of emoji here. The seedling icon indicates an ACEs outcome. And so you can see how they just fold together for students, right? They can see the course-specific outcomes related to biology. And then they can see that there are two ACEs, specific ACEs outcomes attached to this particular assignment. This is a discussion board assignment on the COVID-19 vaccines. So here you can see the relation to content development, which is part of communication, and then information credibility, which is part of our digital fluency ACEs skill. And so by presenting information about vaccines to an audience, they're developing content development skills, and then by evaluating the credibility of multiple websites given, they're developing their information credibility skills. So you can see that one assignment might involve multiple outcomes across different skills. And you can imagine how your particular discipline, let's say, also could be, involved with content development, right? So usually we think of communication, you might just think communication studies, but no, obviously there are many other courses that are using communication, such as this particular biology assignment. And so this next example is actually from my course. So this is from my English 1A class, which is first year composition. And so I have students write an educational autobiography. So this is a narrative writing assignment. And so I just took a snippet of the assignment. There's more directions, obviously, as well. But this is the writing prompt. And then here I have the ACEs skill outcomes. And I use a bullseye to denote any ACEs skill outcomes. And so here I've attached 3 outcomes to the particular assignment. So we have perseverance and growth mindsets, and students are asked to reflect on instances of resilience and growth in the past. And then the clarity of expression, which is part of the communication skill, since not only are they reflecting on this, but they have to narrate these experiences clearly and effectively to a particular audience. So again, just one example of a particular assignment in which multiple skills are assessed. And you can see these same skills could be assessed in a nursing course as well. Maybe you're having students reflect on how a lab went or reflect on their progress across the program. And so students are being assessed across the curriculum for these skill sets. So they may encounter, again, the same skills in a different course. And so hopefully that allows them to see the relevance and the cross-disciplinary nature of these broader employability skills. And so moving from the alignment process, right, taking your existing curriculum and connecting it to the ACEs outcomes that we have, I want to just show, and there's plenty of time for questions as I go through this process, how it's actually performed in Canvas itself. So how we add ACEs outcomes to a Canvas rubric, and then how we assess using the speed grader. And so this just outlines the basics of the process. We have all our ACEs outcomes preloaded in the outcomes area of Canvas. So way back in 2021, faculty first had to import, which was just one kind of extra step. They don't have to do that anymore. Everything's already pre-embedded into every course shell that an instructor is teaching. We use the rubric feature of Canvas, obviously, to add those desired outcomes, and then the form of assessment is simply speed grader. So what faculty are already doing to grade the student. And so again, this just provides an overview of Canvas, but what you would do, when I do see a warning that my connection is unstable, do you hear me?
Yep, you're fine.
Okay, thank you. So what an instructor would do to use that Canvas rubric tool would first select an assignment from the course that has that alignment. They would either need to add or edit a rubric if they're already using a rubric. And then the Find Outcome tool will allow them to select, again, from those pre-embedded folders that are in their courses. From there, they would just import to create the rubric. And then I'll show you in a second, we have a pre-built scale that allows them to assess in SpeedGrader. And so this is what it looks like in Canvas. So we have our rubric here. When a faculty member is setting up the rubric, they would just click here, Find Outcome. Once they click Find Outcome, they'll see the skills folders available here. So you see there's a folder for each particular ACES skill. We have those 12 ACES skills. And then when they see the bullseyes, these indicate the actual outcomes. So these are the outcomes that they would be attaching and assessing. So, once you get the hang of it, it's a pretty simple process. And for instructors that are already using rubrics, which of course we encourage, it just takes an additional 1 or 2 minutes to access your existing rubric, find the outcome, find the appropriate outcome that you want to attach, and import it. And so once you've added that outcome, this is just an example of what your rubric's going to look like. So you can see here, this particular instructor already had an existing grading rubric where the points are attached. And then this is what the ACES outcome would look like. Again, you see that bullseye here. And as I mentioned a second ago, there's a 1 through 4 rubric scale. So this is pre-built in for all outcomes. So we use the same skill across the board, regardless of what class or assignment it is. And you can see here, it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 scale, but that signifies emerging, developing, achieving, and mastering. And so what students are going to shoot for is that achieving and mastery, and that's why the check marks are there. Trey can speak a bit more to this as far as the credentialing, but the emerging and developing would not give students credit towards a credential. But thinking of it just as far as assessment, this would be the assessment scale that we provide students. So when students are assessed for ACES outcomes, it's transparent, so they can see this, they can see all elements of the rubric. But I think it's really important to emphasize it's ungraded. So you can see here, it does not impact their grade. So there's no penalty, let's say, if they're being first introduced to an outcome and it's emerging. They just have more time to practice. And again, they can practice these same skills across the coursework. So I showed you examples from biology and English. Both the biology faculty member and myself, we both attach content development to our assignments because that's a skill that's emphasized in both courses. And so a student in theory could be assessed in the same outcomes across their coursework and see that progression. So because it's through rubrics, they're able to see their assessment as well as their progression across their courses. And so the last portion that I want to discuss before we have even more time for Q&A is just engaging students, and a few of the ways that faculty members have been doing that, just again, to make the process transparent and make students aware of what ACEs are and how they can connect across their courses to their career goals, to employability skills, as well as kind of those lifelong learning skills. And so we really encourage faculty to introduce ACEs outcomes in the course syllabus. We're really primed on always making sure that we include those CLOs, those course learning outcomes, but also including the ACEs outcomes that a particular instructor has decided to assess, I think is really important, so that students have that introduction from the very beginning. As well as, making a little time, especially at the beginning of the semester, to explain ACEs during class meetings. We do have some ready-made pages available in Canvas Commons for faculty to import so that they don't have to create it from scratch. And those include brief explanations of ACEs, videos, and all the outcomes for students to see. And then, as I showed in my examples, listing the particular outcomes in an associate assignment. That's not only vital for transparency and authentic assessment, but also can remind students of those ACEs outcomes. And then this next feature Trey's going to be discussing, but enabling the Credential Alignment Tool in Canvas. So we are so proud of a brand new piloting tool in which students can see their progress in real time. And so we'll be showing you that later in the hour, what that tool looks like for faculty and students in Canvas.
Laura, do you have a quick a minute? Ivan, would you like to ask a question? You have a lengthy a question that you are asking in the chat. Ivan, would you like to unmute yourself?
Yeah, I can wait until the Q&A. I just wanted to get the question into the chat.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I'm almost wrapped up on this first portion. So this next slide is just a sample syllabus statement as we continue to discuss how faculty are encouraged to engage students and make them aware of ACEs. And so this is just a sample statement we give faculty of what you might include on your syllabus. Again, I recommend that faculty mention ACEs in the same place that they mention the course learning outcomes. So part of this process has been recognizing that SLOs are kind of an umbrella, that represent many other different outcomes, right? So SLOs can include not just course learning outcomes, also program learning outcomes, institutional learning outcomes, which again, our institutional learning outcomes at Chaffey are tied and aligned to ACEs. And so just to wrap us up here, I want to just preview the future of assessment at Chaffey, at which point Trey will be taking over after my Q&A. And so what we see in the future is course learning outcome that does occur entirely on Canvas. So just like we have pre-embedded ACEs outcomes in a shell, what we'll be having is the course learning outcomes already readily available for all faculty in Canvas. So they can also perform their course learning outcome assessment in a similar manner. And then, as I had mentioned before, discipline-specific credential pathways is the most exciting feature that Trey will be speaking to. And these are crafted by department faculty themselves and will allow faculty to embed and explore more discipline-specific, right, technical skills, as well as those broader ACEs outcomes.
Did we lose Laura? Laura?
I think she froze.
Matthew, okay, Matthew, just a quick question. We can utilize this time. I don't know if you know, how does the ACEs find their way into the course line of record? And that's one question. How do they find the ways?
Yeah, we'll actually be covering that in Trey's portion.
Trey's
So
portion,
that's a
gotcha.
great, I love that question because it really gets to the meat of like,
Okay.
where does this become formal outcomes assessment for accreditation purposes? So
Yeah, thank you
that's
so much. And then also the process, how do you guys work? Yeah, thank you, appreciate it.
You're back, Laura.
I am. Sorry, I might have missed the last, but I think Matt answered it.
Yep, we are fine. We are fine.
I think we have some time for any more Q&A if anybody.
Yeah, I posted a question in the chat asking, see that you've got the outcomes separated from rubric points. So just wondering, is that challenging or undesirable to link those? Or is there a reason you separate them? Because I'm wondering, why would I want to add things to look at that? It just seems to me like the way I build my courses, they're all overlapped. So just curious.
Yeah, we made a decision early on, and you can make them worth points. So that is a feature if that's desirable for your college that you can pursue. Outcomes and Assessment decided to make the official recommendation that programs have also supported to make them ungraded. And represent more what traditional course learning outcome looks like too, right? We don't traditionally, when we provide and perform assessment, attach that to a student's grade. It's a learning outcome. And so part of that is making it kind of penalty free for students. So it's focused on the learning itself and the progress itself. So it is transparent. They can see their score as far as the 1 through 4 scale rubric, but there aren't any points attached. And so we look at as there's the rubric with the grading elements, and then there's also the assessment. So there's 2 simultaneous goals that we're accomplishing with each rubric, both the graded element, but beyond that, and we call it beyond grades, we also have that assessment, which is for the student tied to the credentials. They're kind of focused on the credentials, which I know Trey is going to be talking about. I was more focused on the assessment. So that's our assessment portion. And using Canvas, we can obviously have just a great more deal of data than external surveys. And when we were doing it on Google Forms and everything was kind of siloed and in different areas, it's all available on Canvas. So again, it's much more than just the points or the grades. It's that assessment, and it's also the way that we do credentialing. But I do think Chaffey's decided it's important for students to not feel pressured in their assessment and have it tied to the grade. But again, you can attach points and make it a graded element in Canvas. That technology is available.
Yvonne, would you like to ask your question?
Yes. So, Laura, as you were talking about how the ACEs outcomes are embedded in each course so that the faculty member doesn't have to go and pull it into their course every time they're creating a new course. So I'm curious, like, what is the mechanism for that automatically being in their course?
I will have to turn it over to Trey.
Yes, I was going to type it, but then Yvonne asked it so we can speak to it. So it is, we uploaded the outcomes at the instance level of Canvas, and then it is blueprinted to all of the courses.
Okay, so you use
uh,
blueprinting.
Yes, and I know I have Rhiannon on the line too. It may be a different method. I know initially we did blueprinting, but that's so the ACEs are automatically in courses when courses are created. So then faculty can just pull in what's relevant to their curriculum through the
Okay.
rubric.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Laura, quick question. Does Chaffey, does your assessments, are they at the student level or at the course level to better understand how your assessment process work?
I think we lost her.
Yeah. Can you answer that?
To that. So ask that one more time, Enrique, so I can make sure.
How do you do your assessments? Are they already at the course level or at the student level?
Both. So the outcome is brought in at the course level and attached to assignments, and then individual, once students complete the assignment or submit as part of the grading, they're assessed. So from a data perspective, we have the granular student level data related to that assessment.
So then how do you capture at the student level? How do you capture the ACEs at the student level or at the course level?
That's going to be the second one. That's
Oh,
the
okay.
good question,
All right,
right?
thank
We got
you.
all that
Thank
rich
you.
data. Now what do we do with it?
Thank you so much.
We're just holding you. We're just like, come on through, come back through.
Hi, May, can you have a question? Yes.
Thank you. I'm wondering what the faculty response was to that. Were there any complaints about academic freedom or about a CTE style office monkeying around with their course shells in Canvas? I don't know who's able to answer that. Is that Trey?
Yeah, I think we can all answer that one, but yeah, Laura, why don't you speak from the faculty perspective on that? I feel like that's the.
I mean, one thing we emphasized was really what I had mentioned earlier in the presentation, that we are not asking faculty in any way to redesign their coursework or to change their teaching methods or their assessments. And we're not going into their course shells. We're just enabling them to have those outcomes, right? So faculty have the purview to decide, which particular assignments they want to align to. The only requirements they have is fulfilling whatever their department requirements have specified, which again, departments also have that purview to determine what outcomes they want to ask faculty to assess. So I had a slide earlier that showed, you know, the requirement's 3 outcomes of those 48. And it can function in a very similar manner to traditional course learning outcomes, you know, where faculty are given the course learning outcomes, maybe a particular semester asked to assess a particular outcome. And most programs allow faculty to just pick whichever assessment they think aligns best. You know, we do have some programs that will create an assignment to make it easier for faculty, but that's obviously not a requirement. So in many ways, we try to make the process as similar to what faculty are used to and what they've already been doing in the past for course learning outcome assessment.
Thank you.
And I'll speak just from the administrator evil empire perspective, is that I think, you know, making sure that there were a lot of resources on the front end of this work to support faculty, and also spending time building with faculty leaders like Laura, who have a lot of respect across campus. Laura isn't going to say this about herself, but she has a lot of integrity, as you can probably tell, and faculty really respect her perspective. And the faculty leaders of this work, who are also the leads on our outcomes assessment committee, were at the forefront of designing the rubrics, of having the hard conversations as a subcommittee of Academic Senate to make the determination about what would be the final draft for 48 official rubrics for the college to represent all of our institutional learning outcomes. That's a really unprecedented kind of degree of collaboration, I think, if you think about, you know, how hard it is to get a 26,000 student institution of faculty and departments all on the same page about saying, okay, these are the rubrics we're all going to say we kind of agree to when we have our institutional learning outcomes as the guiding star for what all of our students should learn. And that is largely due to a combination of both just making sure that we had resources for reassigned time for faculty to invest the time and effort, and then also having the right faculty leaders at the forefront of the work.
Laura, you want to take the, or Rupali? I think you had a question or wondering. Do you want to state that verbally or?
Yes, yeah, I put it in the chat. Just a moment. Yeah. So I was just wondering, you know, if students are given multiple opportunities to demonstrate their mastery of these skills, ACE skills, you know, in case they can't show it on their first attempts. So that is my question.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something we really encourage faculty when we conduct our workshops and give them information. It's not a requirement, but it's highly encouraged for the reasons you outlined in your question. The amazing thing, though, about this being across the curriculum is, let's say maybe they have 2 opportunities for a skill. I often always try to include 2 opportunities for a particular outcome. Let's say both times in my course, they're not quite there yet. Maybe they're getting that developing. So it's a 2 level, it's not counting towards their credential. The great thing is they can take their next English course and be assessed for the same outcomes, or they can take a course in another field and be assessed. And since we have so many assessments being performed now, that has happened organically, where students might be assessed in a course maybe only once or twice and not score that achieving yet, but then take their next course or take another subject and they're able to assess. But I do think as part of course design, we really do encourage faculty to really focus on that alignment step and give consideration to it, and consider both which outcomes they most want to emphasize to students, and then provide multiple attempts for the student to be able to be assessed. And I saw a question earlier. sorry, I don't have the name, I think it was up in the chat, but can you attach ACEs outcomes to formative assessments? And the answer is definitely yes. So things like discussion boards and those more, formative assessments can also be assessed for ACEs, and that would allow you to provide more than just one attempt for the student.
Thank you.
Christy, would you like to unmute yourself? It looks like Christy has your hand up. Thank you,
I'm
Christy.
sorry. I have, yeah. Technical challenges. So how does this connect up to resource allocation? How do you connect up these results to resource allocation?
Sorry, I was answering your question in the chat. So our PSR, our program review process that Laura mentioned, the outcomes are tied to that. And then typically with outcomes assessment, there's this like fuzzy relationship, right, between how students are being assessed in at least public higher education institutions and how resources are allocated to those departments. And typically, as you probably know, what usually happens is the two don't really affect each other as much as they should. Assessment becomes kind of like a performative internal thing amongst faculty to measure learning. And then resource allocation is more about like if a faculty member has retired, if there's an emerging department, if there's a perceived need about a new program that needs to meet some kind of like industry CTE demand in the region. And the assessment of learning within departments, unfortunately, at most higher ed institutions, as probably everybody in this room is aware, they don't touch each other as much as they should. And so I have to be honest to say that right now, we still are living in a world to a certain degree where outcomes assessment is a mandatory process that our faculty are doing. They're going through this, which is fabulous. The students are more connected to the learning in an intentional kind of way. They see the outcomes assessment occurring more transparently. But the point at which we start to say, we are going to create a new faculty line, right? Like a new faculty member tenure track position because of some of the outcomes assessment data that we're seeing, or we're going to let a program fall away because of the outcomes assessment data that we're seeing. We're not there yet, but the hope is because we have better data now that we're able to get to a more intentional relationship with resource allocation, which is really the goal, like a huge goal of this work. So really important question and hard question too. Thank you.
Someone had posted about integrator reliability. Thank you, Enrique. You put the rubric framework in the chat. And so I think that kind of answers the question of how we, maintain that reliability. And so faculty are given that rubric framework, and it's a really long document, but we tell faculty just look up the outcome that you're assessing, and you don't have to read it like it's reading homework. And so if you're looking at that particular outcome, like for English, right now we're assessing clarity of expression. So again, it's very similar to CLO assessment, where we're telling faculty choose, any writing assignment, even better if you can attach it to all 4 of the writing assignments. So again, students have multiple attempts for that. And then I give them the 1 through 4, that rubric framework for clarity of expression. So they have an idea of what the difference between, let's say, emerging and developing would look like versus achieving and mastery. So there is that reliability there.
I'd also like to say that I think Nicole is bringing up a good point about the traditional practice of norming in outcomes assessment before moving into formal assessment, that faculty would get together and, norm and look at how they are in a room together, right? Look at how they're assessing one particular signature assignment, for example, right? That's the more traditional approach to assessment. And we are taking a slightly different pivot here in that our focus, instead of doing inter-rater reliability on the front end, is instead to in that sort of way, where actually you have small groups of faculty working together on different signature assignments to see, are we seeing this the same way according to the rubric, right? Because that's kind of like really where you have inter-rater reliability in a more typical outcomes assessment sense. Instead, this approach is we're aggregating way more data than institutions normally do about how we are seeing students develop certain skills in relation to assignments that are tied to rubrics. And because we have all of that data, we are able to utilize more of a bottom-up, like big data analysis approach to kind of back into rater reliability gap analysis, because we have, and that's one thing we'll talk about next, we have the chain of custody all the way back to the assignment for all of these hundreds of thousands of assessments. And so we can start to use, like, artificial intelligence and big tools like that to start to establish how subjectively are faculty seeing the relationship between a rubric and various assignments, which, sounds a little chaotic, but actually you can get a more exact perspective on learning measurement using that big data approach than you can if you have smaller groups of faculty doing a more manual kind of process of taking one assignment and looking at how they're assessing one rubric across like a 4-point scale, which is a pretty crude kind of approach.
Alexa, you have a question, and from there we can move on.
Sure. Thanks so much. Really appreciate all the clarity you guys have provided around this. I think I'm just trying to like transfer it to like course, like at a course level. This is more the ACEs are more of those like performance-based type of assessments. Like if you're giving something that's, I don't know, more of a like constructed project or assignment, like this would be a better place to put one of those like ACEs outcomes, like less so of an exam or of am I understanding that correctly?
I think any authentic assessment can be tied to pieces. So in addition to summative assessments, like things like you mentioned, capstones or portfolios, we do also have faculty, attaching it to discussion boards or group work or even labs. I think I agree, though, it works best, like I said, when you have a sort of authentic assessment where students are either reflecting or there can be a direct observation of the skill in action, rather than like, maybe just multiple choice exams probably wouldn't tie as well to the ACEs outcomes.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you. I work in North Carolina, and looking at like a program level, it's exciting to think about how those are like transferable skills to go across a program, and you can measure them. So thanks. Y'all's website is really great too. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. You're full of experience. I mean, you're like a unicorn. So thank you so much for your presentation. Dr. Moran, would you like to proceed?
Sure. Thank you, guys. And actually, I think a lot of the questions that were asked, there'll be a richer series of answers for throughout this next part of the presentation. Are you all seeing a screen that says part 2? Awesome, cool. So here's part 2, which is, if you remember, Laura's part 1 is beyond grades. This part 2 is beyond transcripts, where we're thinking about like, okay, how does all of this translate to the student learning records? And currently, outcomes assessment, unless you're, at a maybe competency-based education institution or something like that, but most of us who are in higher ed, public institutions, outcomes assessment sort of lives in a separate world from the learning records that students receive, because those are graded and they have the course title. They don't have a lot of information about what the skills were that students were developing, or what the outcomes assessment were. processes were. And so what we're trying to do is tie all of this really rich work that the faculty are doing in outcomes assessment to learning records so that there's a real solid and secure chain of custody from enrollment to employment. Like, how do we translate all of this skill demonstration that students do to employment outcomes? And then to the question that Christy asked earlier on, then we can start to maybe think about, okay, how does this connect to resource allocation? So the main tool that we've been using for this work is leveraging technology across several different platforms to measure and clarify the learning process, both for faculty and for students and for the institution. And then next, hopefully for employers. So as Laura mentioned, we import these 48 outcome rubrics into Canvas Outcomes, and then in the course shells, faculty are able to pull down those rubrics for direct assessment of these durable skills in courses using the ILO outcome rubrics. And then we have worked with Instructure to create this tool called a Canvas Outcomes Alignment Tool, where we can create alignments between those outcomes and digital credentials and Canvas credentials. And so as students demonstrate mastery, we can set the criteria by which we want them to receive digital credentials for recognizing their performance of competency across all sorts of skills. And these credentials, they're transparent, they're owned by the student as well. They can share them with whoever they want, and after the institution, after they leave the institution, they still own them. They can keep them in their digital wallet, if you're familiar with digital backpacks for digital credentials. They're also very secure, they're blockchain encrypted, and they're interoperable, which means they can speak to other platforms, they can be embedded in LinkedIn, they can push out to different types of job boards, things like that. So that kind of learning record, we're hoping for students, is a much more accurate but also useful tool than the current transcript. So here's a screenshot of the outcome alignment tool. And if you think about everything that Laura said about faculty assessing students based on these skills and the students being able to see that they're being assessed on these skills, there's this next level up where faculty and students also get to see their progress towards mastery in these different skill domains as a holistic experience across coursework throughout multiple disciplines. So here's an example here where a student has been assessed 4 times in the area of digital fluency. And within the area of digital fluency, there's a subcategory called information credibility, and that has its own rubric. And so this student has done 4 different assessments in the area of information credibility. But if you look on the right, you can see that has occurred in 3 different courses. So it's occurred in a history course, in a health science course. This is health science 30 is medical terminology, and in a computer information systems course. So you can start to look at how the student gets a sense of, okay, these skills and outcomes that my college is valuing, I'm actually learning them across multiple disciplines, and they're contextualized within those disciplinary contexts. And the faculty also get to see this within Canvas. They can see, for this student, what has been their learning journey across across the skills that the faculty has indicated in their course that they're assessing. So when a faculty member has an assessment tied to information credibility, they can see for their students how many assessments that student has done in their course and outside of their course. So the faculty start to feel like they're a part of something bigger than just their own discipline when they're assessing these skills. And then the skill attainment is made visible to students through the digital credentials that are awarded after they've demonstrated competency. Currently, right now, we have a token to skill credential structure where, as students make progress in different learning outcomes that are those 4 learning outcomes for each skill domain, they earn tokens for each of those learning outcomes. And those tokens set them up to earn the full skill credential. So students can actually see their progress towards a certain skill, but broken out in the different domains that that skill is made up of. So that a skill like communication, for example, isn't just viewed by students as just one term, one concept. It's actually how communication is demonstrated in multiple domains. For example, active listening is one domain of communication, right? In this case here, you're looking at adaptability, but the specific token that a student has earned for adaptability is goal setting. And then they see their journey on these learning outcomes through Canvas credentials in pathways. So here is an example of that student previously who has earned 2 out of the 4 tokens for the adaptability skill credential. And they can see, okay, I've earned these 2, but then if they go back into their outcome alignment tool in Canvas, they can actually see which courses they've been assessed in and which assessments were successful, which ones weren't. So they really have a 360-degree picture of their competency journey throughout the institution, across departments, across courses. And then what's really nice is there's metadata that's held within these digital credentials. And so they can be tagged with with keywords that push out into Indeed.com, so that when students click on them, they will see job postings, and you can even limit it to your zip code. As an institution, we have that limited parameter, so it's within a certain radius, so that students see job postings that are either remote or within a geographical area that's close enough to the institution that it could be reasonable for a student to apply for these jobs. And so they can see jobs that have those keywords listed on them as skills. And while maybe these aren't the career jobs they're looking for, and if we're just talking about durable skills that are cross-cutting, right, they obviously apply to all sorts of types of jobs. For here, you see automotive dealer, retail specialist, a team member for a pizzeria, right, all sorts of different things. It starts to connect a student to the relevance of what they're learning in, say, Laura's English class as a skill that they can demonstrate in a myriad of different types of professional environments. And they also get to see that the diversity of jobs that there are out there, right? That it's a tool for pushing career exploration as an extension of outcomes assessment. And I think, career centers tend to live as totally separate worlds from outcomes assessment, right? This is a way that we start to tie those things together. And then there's this other question that I'm sure maybe many of you are asking, which we get asked every time, which is, well, what do the employers think? Like, do they care? Do they care about the credential? I can't count the number of times that question's been asked. And it's a really important question because, to be honest, digital credentials are very new. Some people think they're corny, especially if they're called badges. Employers, maybe they care, maybe they don't. It's really very much up in the air because it's not. It hasn't been institutionalized in our culture as a formal kind of record of learning that has some kind of currency that can be quantified very easily right now. And I think there's a lot of good room for research on that topic. But what we are pressing into is trying to close the loop between the practice of these skills in the working world and what happens in the classroom. So if we're saying a student is demonstrating a skill in a classroom, like adaptability, right, then we also need a mechanism to test how that skill is being practiced in some sort of working environment. So that's where we use work experience courses. Some state institutions might call it cooperative education. These are just courses that are like internship courses, right? And most states in the US, because this is a national audience, have a similar kind of structured requirement for these courses where students earn a certain number of credits for a certain number of work hours, and they need to identify their objectives on the front end. But what we've done is when students are identifying their objectives on the front end for work experience courses, we've tied those to these rubrics. So students have to identify what are the skills they're going to be demonstrating on these jobs. And then we use the same rubrics that faculty are using in their traditional courses. And then the outcome alignment tool is connecting them in a different sort of way to the credential that they earn, which, as you can see here, it has this little employer verified tag to it. This is where we're telling the student, okay, now you've earned this skill, but you've earned it through an employer verified experience tied to the college. Now, this is all part of a much bigger ecosystem. Right now, what we've talked about is verification, right? Where we're trying to determine whether or not we're trying to let students know that they've been verified for demonstrating certain competencies according to faculty perspectives. And that's how they're earning digital credentials. And then also teaching and learning, which is a lot of what Laura was talking about, that faculty are utilizing rubrics to measure CLOs and PLOs and competencies, and which then are turned into digital credentials. But there's many more use cases that this work can be applied to now that we have this kind of data, we have that kind of seamless chain of custody, which is curriculum modification and development. Now we can start to look at, okay, well, what are the skills? Does a department feel like the skills that they're seeing emerging out of the data really the skills they want to be focusing on? Because, you know, sometimes there's dozens and dozens of adjuncts who are teaching or connecting maybe a diversity of different types of rubrics to their assignments. Now we have some really organic data to chew on, or even program advisory councils. So when we bring employers together to talk about CTE programs, which is a Perkins requirement, that now we have data sets that we can say, hey, this is all the data we're seeing coming out of our programs that students are demonstrating. Employer industry engagement. When we talk to employers, we have data sets that we can talk to them about that are real demonstrated, verified assessments tied to rubrics. And employer education agreements, maybe those turn into formal agreements. And this is where I hand off to Trey, because we can also start to do that assessment of gap analysis with centers of excellence. In California, centers of excellence are regional labor market indicator research organizations, and for the community colleges. And what that means is we can start right now, center of excellences, they do traditional labor market research that looks at, you know, the Bureau of Labor Statistics, for example, information about what a certain industry is doing as far as potential growth, job opportunities, even sometimes skill sets if they're using O-Net or Burning Glass or something like that. But what they have a really hard time doing is finding out, well, what are the colleges actually giving us from a skill perspective? How do we connect these things together? We can do research on what employers are looking for from skills, but from a skill perspective, but we have a really hard time drilling down on from a data perspective on what colleges are actually demonstrating for skills, for example. And so Trey's going to show a little bit about how we're using the data to produce better tools to connect industry and labor market entities to higher education.
All right, before we do that, want to make sure people don't have any questions around what Matt shared. Christy.
Chat asked one. Yarek, I think, is this layout custom made for Chaffey?
Which layout? The
Credentialing, the way the outcomes are sort of graphically represented in Canvas, all that stuff. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's all of that is custom, and you can design your own credential designs any way you want. We've actually, over the summer, what we're going to work on is building a team of graphic design students, like a student worker team that can work with departments on, you know, like really applied work experience, right? They work with departments and consult on like, what's the design that you feel like represents the learning in your department? So yeah, it's very custom and institution specific.
right, but anybody can do it. If you have access to Canvas credentials, you can make it look just like it looks for us, meaning designing your own badge and then including that language for each of the credentials.
Christy, go ahead and mute yourself.
Yeah, so I apologize if this has already been discussed. There's a lot of great information here. So I understand how I can create opportunities for students to practice and develop things like adaptability, the example that you showed. But I don't teach this. Like adaptability is not part of my course outline of record. So how can I be sure that the badges that I'm awarding are meeting a quality standard and that I'm contributing to students' growth?
That is a good question. That's actually gonna, Matt, once you bring this up, because I think once we talk about the discipline-specific process, it's going to speak to those questions, Christy. So let me talk a little bit about that as we get into that.
I'm also going to say, Christy, you are the hard question asker and the good question asker, because you're asking all of the right questions that I think hold higher ed to task. I just am curious, what kind of institution are you at?
I'm at Sierra College, community college, and I've been doing this a long, long time. I'm part of a graduate from WASC's Assessment Leadership Academy. So yeah, I'm an old timer.
No, but you're asking the future questions, right? You're asking the questions that hold higher education accountable to better quality, right? And better outcomes for students. And so like you're asking all of the right questions. And yeah, I think maybe Trey's
let's lead with the data. Let's lead with the data, because some of those conversations we can start having once we have, you know, some more intimate data around what we're actually prioritizing and valuing in our courses, right? So there was a question earlier around, do we have the student level data? We do. And so part of this process is taking that data dump out of Canvas through the outcomes report, and then figuring out what data stories are coming out of it. So I'm going to share a couple of what we're calling the skills profile. Are you going to share, Matt? Or you want me? I'm gonna let you go drive the.
Oh, sorry, I stopped sharing.
Yes.
Here you go.
So let's look at this spider graph. So Laura shared earlier that we have 6 communities that our departments are grouped under. So because we're assessing across curriculum, we can take a look at the data to see what values, what skills are being valued by the communities, by departments, by faculty, right? And does it align to what we expect? And so this particular graph shows us by community what's being valued. So you can see, like, for example, that manufacturing and industrial design and transportation values critical thinking, data utilization, and empathy more heavily than the other communities, comparatively right now. Whereas environmental responsibility, you can see there's not a lot of communities that are assessing environmental responsibility right now. And so then that can become a source of conversation to understand what, do we understand the context within our disciplines? Are we valuing this skill? Are we able to assess it, or are we giving students opportunity to develop and practice and assess as well? So this is a ACC skills profile, but because we have granular data, we can drill down. So if you go to the next slide, we can look within the department. So we know we have program maps, right? Academic program map that is comprised of GE courses, major courses, elective courses. Now we have an opportunity to see what is being valued. When we say that I am graduating with a degree in gerontology, what does that really mean as far as skills? How did I develop that skills over my academic journey? This skill profile shows us by course type who was developing which skills, which set of courses was I given the opportunity to develop these skills. So you can see this is the interesting one, because GE, we always talk about GE, right? Academic pathways, GEs are a big piece of it. But now we can see what do they contribute to the overall academic development of our students. And if you drill down even further, we can look at specifically gerontology courses and what skills are being valued in those gerontology courses. So in this case, some of them, as expected, empathy, critical thinking, professionalism. There's also some innovation and digital fluency in there, as well as communication. So we then have an opportunity to say to employers, when Chaffey graduates are going into industry, not only will they have these technical skills, but we also know that they have developed these durable or employability skills as well. And they've been assessed along the way. I'm a data geek, so geek out a little bit, but that's the rich data that we have now, where we can start asking those questions about what does a graduate of our college leave the campus with? What are those skill sets? Now, we've only been talking about durable skills for the past 75 minutes. Go to the next slide, Matt. And that really is like the breadth, right? It's over all of our campus, over all of our curriculum. But now we are ready here at the campus to talk about, well, what are those technical skills? What are those discipline-specific skills that students are also developing as majors or even non-majors taking courses throughout our campus? And so I was hired, I've been with Chaffey. I've been part of the family for a while, but officially this last term, I've been on campus to help scale up this work around skills and credentials. So if you remember, I'm a credentialing systems designer. You might say, what the heck is that job, right? I have a front end and a back end. The front end is working with faculty as an instructional designer to say, what are those skills from a program and course perspective that we are calling out in our language and our curriculum? And then the back end is really more of a systems design responsibility of taking a look at how do we streamline these processes so we can automate and be more efficient in identifying those skills, assessing those skills, and then acknowledging those skills. So I'm going to talk you through how we're looking at the depth of skills across the campus. So I started in January. How many departments do we have, Matt? I lost count.
I think 57 so far.
57. Okay. It seems like more. It seems so. 57 departments that I am going to be touching between now and the end of the year. I'm probably at the 60% mark, 60% of those 57. And what I'm doing is I'm going to each department and I'm saying, what skills are we developing as students within your discipline? And there's a process to it. The first, we have a couple of conversations. So I have a faculty lead that I sit down with, and we just have an initial conversation about who are the students coming through your department? What are they hoping to gain? What are some skills that are being prioritized? What do you do? You know, what do you do as an astronomy professor? What do you do as an English professor? What does that engagement look like? So we have an initial conversation. And then I go back and I curate all of the course learning outcomes and objectives from the current curriculum. So if you're in California, that I go to CurricuNet and I do a data dump. By department, let me look at all of the discipline-specific courses and pull that information. And then I do a textual analysis to say, in the language, what is being called out related to skills? What's being called out over and over again across that department? So I draft out the initial skills that are being called out, and then I map it back. I map it back to their current language, SLO language, and I map it back to their courses. And I'll show you how that looks. So I draft that all up, and then I hand it back to the department, and I say, how does this sit with you? Does it look good? What skills are we missing? Are you happy? Does it speak your language? Is it what you do? So we have a secondary conversation. And once we refine the skills and the mapping, then we can start putting it into the system, similar to the ACEs. Not only will they have those durable skills in Canvas, now they will have the technical skills that speak specifically to their program. And then they continue to assess, and now we will start having that data as well. So let's go to the next slide. Let me show you an example. So commercial music was the first department to say, yep, let's do this. So commercial music has two academic pathways. They have a certificate program and they have a AST, a transfer degree. And each of those programs or each of those pathways had 4 program learning outcomes that had different language for both of them. When I curated the outcomes and objectives, they had 91 course objectives and 47 outcomes. Some people may ask, why did you pull both course objectives and outcomes? When I started pulling the data, I realized that there was a lot of overlap and some did not understand the difference between objectives and outcomes. So in order to have richer data to really identify the skills, I pulled all of it. Let's go to the next slide. So this is where we landed with the first draft. We ended up with 3 major skills. Oh, go back. There you go. 3 major skills, and then you also see the ACES Essential Skills Bundle. So looking at their language and outcomes, they were really developing decision-making skills related to industry, understanding and context. They were learning how students were learning how to create sound, and they were also learning how to capture sound. Similar to the ACES framework, where we have the skill and the learning outcome, we use a similar structure for the discipline-focused skill pathways, where you have the skill and then beneath it, some learning outcomes that speak to what do we mean when we say we're creating sound. And again, this is based on the language that was already in the program. The ACES Essential Skills Bundle speaks to those institutional learning outcomes. So as I look through all of that language, I drafted out what was being called related to the institutional learning outcomes currently in their language. And this is helpful for departments who are just beginning to assess those ILOs across their programs. But it also helped departments who are already assessing to take another look to see, oh, well, maybe we'll assess this, coming this academic year, or maybe we want to switch our focus on what we're prioritizing as far as developing. So these were the initial skills, and then we mapped them. So if you go to the next slide, you'll see an example of the mapping. So this is an example of what the mapping looked like for commercial music. We have all of the major courses for those academic pathways. And then it was mapped to not only the skill, but the CLOs as well. So it's sort of a backwards design, if you will. Traditionally, we'll do that, if you're starting a new program, you usually do this in the very beginning, right? You identify the skills, your outcomes, and then you determine your courses. This process that we undertook was more of a backwards design. We already have the courses, we already have our programs, our academic map. Now it's about identifying the skills and the alignment that we currently have in our curriculum. Go to the next slide, Matt. The secondary conversation that I have with departments is, now that you've decided on your skills, we can begin to think about what bundles of skills would be of value in industry. And this is separate from they have a degree or they have a certificate. We're talking about, from a skills perspective, are there bundles of skills that are needed now in industry or would be valuable to industry? And so in this example for commercial music, he said, yeah, even before they have their degree or certificate, if they know how to create sound and record sound, they can get a job right now before they get their degree. And so we made that a milestone. We said, okay, if they can demonstrate those skills as they're working towards their completion, let's acknowledge that. And so we ended up doing milestones, which then can turn into micro-credentials on a skills pathway. So again, alternate pathways from the academic pathways. Now we have micro-credentials that we can set up. And because we have everything flowing from Canvas at a direct assessment level, we'll be able to acknowledge in real time once they've hit those thresholds. Let's go to the second or the next slide, Matt. So this is an idea of who's done this work of identifying disciplinary skills, disciplinary skills as well as potential micro-credentials. You can see across all 6 academic communities, we've hit at least 2 or 3 departments. So this runs the gamut, not only for CTE, but for our academic pathways as well. Next slide. So in Canvas, how does this look? So we have the ACEs, which we batch uploaded in Canvas at the institutional level. And now what we're doing is that we have another folder. So in addition to the institutional learning outcomes ACEs, we now have the discipline ACEs that we're installing at the institutional instance of Canvas, and we're grouping by ACC and then department. So what this will allow faculty to do is when they're ready to assess those technical skills, they can go find their department folder and bring in all of those outcomes. Let's go to the next slide, Matt. And then these are just some screenshots. Matt mentioned the outcome alignment tool, but this is essentially what we're doing. So you have your outcomes, your skills, your learning outcomes. That edit alignment still shows us what outcomes are attached to that milestone of public health foundations. So for this particular milestone, they have 4 learning outcomes attached to it. They have to assess at a 3 or higher at least twice around each of those learning outcomes. And once they do, so that's a minimum of 8 assignments. Once they do, they will get that milestone credential of public health foundations. All right. I said enough. And we have some time for some more questions or wonderings.
Trelisa, quick question. So where does all this gather? All this data? And how do you gather the data for us, those data nerds like me?
Right. So it's in your administrative panel under settings, and then you have reports. So we are pulling the outcomes report, which has the granular student level data that you were asking about earlier.
And is that a special feature that Chaffey pays for that, or that's integrated?
That's standard.
It's standard.
Yes.
Also, the data is getting too crazy right now. So we're going to have to start paying for a data warehouse to push the Canvas data directly into a data warehouse, because it's like the exports are just millions of rows now, right? If you think about
we're about 500,000, about 500,000 rows right now. And we're not even 100% scaled up. And then we just added the disciplinary skills. So it's gonna grow exponentially in the next semester.
And that's why it's so, thank you, Trey, for the correction. That's why I think, it's important to be thinking about this from a big data perspective. Like, like really we're, and then also, I think assessment, in higher ed usually is not like leaning into the kind of metrics that maybe like, is typical of a digital environment, right? Because we have been in a more manual like process traditionally, but if we start tagging everything that's learned, the amount of data that we start to produce is pretty astronomical. And the nice thing is now we have tools that we can sift through that data and get insights in really effective and powerful ways.
So then, which
Yes.
means that you, the question I have is then I'm guessing you're using Tableau, right? Tableau then communicates with Canvas, right?
No, right
No?
now it's a download. That's what Matt's speaking to. Right now, the data's still small enough where we can just download it from Canvas. But eventually we're going to have to sync up directly with their data warehouse to get our data, because it's going to be too much.
Oh,
But David asked, just to be clear, are all of the outcomes installed at the root level? Yes. And that is so that we can have the data administratively. So we don't want faculty to upload outcomes directly into courses because we won't have that data. Installing it at the root level gives us the system data.
It also controls the language and the rubrics for accreditation purposes so that we can say if a department, if a COR, so that the process that Trey just described is really, it's really what she's doing is working with departments on tuning their learning outcomes on their course outlines of record. Most departments didn't really care that much about what they put for the learning outcomes, just to be candid, right? Like when I was a faculty member, I didn't either. I was like, fine, whatever, like we'll do it. But this process that Trey's doing with them, they're coming out with a group of learning outcomes now that they feel more excited about, that they're more connected to, they feel like it connects to students and their career opportunities. So those replace what is on the CORs, right? And then institutionally, we need to make sure that that integrity is maintained, which is another reason why it needs to be installed at the instance level.
Trey, this is just a tremendous amount of information, and from my perspective, what I would like to know more about is how do you scale the effort, in a sense that you guys, it took you a while, right, to build the team, to build the know-how, to build the capacity to do all this work, because again, it's just absolutely tremendous, and I really would like to take a look at your assessment, SLO assessment data, and what it is that's doing it for you. But how do you, if you were to speak to, again, we have audience, really even outside of community colleges, a piece of advice, how do you make it work in a systematic way, right? So that it's not just the flare up, it's not just, the 2 or 3 of us who are gung-ho on big data and we're going to make it work, and, it lasts for 2 or 3 semesters, maybe even 2 years, and then fizzles out because there's just no support for it. How do you think this is going to play out for you?
So I'll address it from the process and system perspective, and then I'll leave the floor to Matt and Laura to talk about faculty and administrative lenses. I am a data geek. I'm all about systems. And so when we undertook this work, it was really about understanding the process from a system perspective and using our system. So we knew when we started in 2020, right after the pandemic, literally, because everybody was using the system, right? Prior to that, it was still optional. But once we hit the pandemic, everybody was in Canvas. And so that was the opportune time to really test the workflow. We had an idea of how it could work, but now this was the time to actually collect the data. But using the system's help, Canvas is built for this, for the most part, right? The outcomes, the rubric, we have faculty teaching in the system, so it made sense. The little hiccup that we had was really tying it to the credential piece, because if you remember, Canvas Credential used to be Badger, which was a separate company.
Right.
And then they bought structure called Badger, and that presented an opportunity to streamline the system. Prior to that, it was a very manual process. And so that work that we undertook with them to create that outcomes alignment tool really was for us to be able to automate and scale up in a way that made sense for us. And so that was the key, was that outcomes alignment tool, because that streamlined everything in the system without having that manual piece from a resource perspective. And then I forgot who stated it earlier, that we're already doing this piece around skills. Now it's just, how do we call it out? That has been a huge piece, even in the process, the back end process for me, because I'm a one person, one and a half, because we do have a short-term worker that's helping me now. But to go across the system really required an understanding of the Chaffey structure, like how do we structure our departments in our academic program, and then to be able to speak to faculty in a way that could bring out what those natural skills that are in their discipline. But we had to shore up the process. We had to make it succinct. So when we position this with departments, it's 2 hours. It's a 2-hour commitment. It's that first discussion, and then I'm doing that heavy lift of analysis, and then it's that secondary discussion. So faculty are really being able to sit in the seat of being an expert. And that's where we wanted them to be. We didn't want them to be able to have to play around and come up, and we did that heavy lifting. We just really wanted them to speak to what they do. And that has helped the process move along. Okay.
I just wanted to put like an exclamation mark on what Trey just said, because usually in outcomes assessment, right, it's like this whole process of, we're going to teach you how to write learning outcomes, and then all the departments are going to write it with some faculty coaches who help them. But like having an expert instructional designer like Trey, it's like we flipped the model to more of what is traditional for distance ed and online learning, when you have an expert instructional designer working with faculty to help them realize their vision for what they want in their departments. That's a model that I think is really ideal for outcomes assessment. I think the faculty to faculty coaching model is really important, but you need some other bandwidth in there with some other experts who come in, who their sole job is being kind of, designers with them.
Matthew, from my experience, I'm really glad that you stated that you do need to have experts, right? You do need to have a good person who is like Trey, instructional designer, and then you do need to have research people behind you. It's just that for most of us, I think you mentioned it earlier in your presentation, all these efforts amount to one thing, which is accountability, right? Let's make sure we generate the appropriate reports for accreditation. What students learn in the process, like it's not even on anybody's radar. And that's why, again, I'm just, listening to your stories here, and it's just amazing. What Laura mentioned earlier, you start with the needs assessment, right? You engage students, you make sure that you rely on feedback. So I think that would be a question for me, if you were to perhaps, in few words, just outline the process that made it happen, in a sense that, I imagine you didn't necessarily have to pay people to twist their arms, do those SLOs by the end of the week, I'll check on you next week, kind of a thing. It was the conversations must have been much, much, much in-depth and much profound. And again, I'm just amazed at the work that you've done. Would you please comment on it? How did you actually go about making sure that, hey, what students learn in terms of skill, competency matters? It's important to them. Employers are looking forward to it. When students transfer to other schools, faculty in future educational institutions are going to be looking for those skills. How did you make this switch?
That's really, I think Laura is a key person to talk to that, because that was so much of the faculty culture building that the leads did. So yeah, Laura, why don't you talk if you want to talk about that?
Yeah, I mean, none of it would be possible without faculty buy-in first. We're the direct line to students. So I'd say that first step, Trey mentioned there was something we looked at. I don't think this would have been possible if the pandemic hadn't happened and faculty were on campus. So from the technical side of just that occurred and made it possible that every faculty member, at least at Chaffey, was, required to maintain a course shell. That's something that's in the contract too, even as we return to in person. And, even if a faculty member is teaching entirely in person, they, as part of the contract, they maintain a course shell with that information, which includes also the grade book. So they must maintain their grade book in Canvas. So that's the technical portion, but obviously the huge part is the buy-in and making faculty feel like it's worth it. So we began these talks back in 2020. It was really helpful that we had a faculty inquiry team to kind of have some data to start with, talk to some employers in the community, talk to faculty about some of these issues. That was the starting point. And I would describe our first efforts as pretty under the radar, kind of like a pilot with faculty who just really cared. We searched through and tried to go across the ACCs, those academic career communities, to find faculty members who really cared about embedding employability skills, were excited about the project. And then from there, we brought in even more stakeholders. So this was not just an outcomes and assessment effort. Obviously, we kind of helped lead the conversations. We involved the Senate. We had some difficult conversations too. So many of the questions that were brought up today were brought up. And so I would say just getting faculty members who are passionate about it, and then getting some of that data in. And then from there, students got involved. And we needed the faculty buy-in first, obviously, because they needed to embed these ACEs into their assessments. But student interest really started taking off as well. Students started asking instructors. I started having instructors come to me who weren't using ACEs, like, oh, my students are asking, are we going to talk about ACEs? Are there going to be any ACEs? And that type of buy-in and interest from the students, I think, was really pivotal too, in encouraging faculty to join on board. And then we did all that before we scaled it up and integrated it into program review, which is kind of the requirement portion of it. So now it is a requirement that each program have a conversation about ACEs. And as I mentioned, specify at least three of the 48 outcomes that they want to assess. And then it's up to them also. We gave departments that ability to pinpoint the outcomes that they think most align, and also determine their assessment, just like with course learning outcomes assessment, that's under the programs and departments' purview.
It's like the free sample approach, right? Like I think outcomes assessment as an accreditation requirement, ever since that happened, has just felt like a stick and there's no carrot, right? And so instead, what we really usually start with every time, it's like a flywheel project, right? We're just adding more and more flywheels. And we have like a roadmap of 10 years of more flywheels that we want to add. But every flywheel that we add, we're like, come taste this. This is cool. This is better than what you're already doing. Like, you will like this better than what you're doing for outcomes assessment, but you don't have to do it. And then people try it. And some people don't like it. Like, I had a faculty member the other day tell me point blank, badges are stupid, and so totally cool. But there's enough people that do feel like it's better than the alternative that they're interested. And then because it's not a requirement, then, people get on board, and then that creates more momentum. There's a fire tech faculty member on here who's the coordinator for fire tech, James Sloan, and he and his faculty feel like identifying these skills is really important for their fire tech EMT program, for their employers. The ambulance companies that they're sending students out to need to see, what are they learning,
And if you could please, that's again, I am just so happy to hear that each one of you is mentioning students at some point. because really sort of like the dark side of it all, I completely understand and I sympathize with the amount of data, right? That's probably yet a different discussion that you're going to have at some point once it really grows, in a sense, how to control it, how to make it meaningful, how to make it work. But at the beginning of the discussion, you just keep saying students matter, they need to be involved. Would you please elaborate a little bit? Just Laura mentioned that students are actually talking to faculty, asking them about the outcomes for the course. How did you get that started? How did you get it going? How did you manage? Because again, it would have been so much easier to just simply say, hey, we do grades like everybody else. What's the next question? So it just would be great, I think, to hear your experience, your perspective as how did you manage spread the word?
Well, in addition to having those rubrics that are now transparent, so students can actually see the assessment occurring along with their grade, we've also, collaborated with marketing and outreach so that the credential portion is also tied to it. So I think the main ways students engage with ACEs would be both in the actual course itself, first just through the rubrics, which, I'll admit, could sometimes get a little more hidden. That's why we have that credential alignment tool that enables, it's on the left-hand side of Canvas. I've had my students in my class, click on that, and then they get really excited because you can see it. They can see their progress across all their courses. They also can view it through my Chaffey. So I think that's been the most helpful in getting them excited. And then I think Matt can speak more to also how they're notified and how they're informed. It's real time, right? Instantaneous when they achieve a credential or a token.
Yeah, now it's real time. And I don't even know how many, tokens and credentials have been awarded, but tens of thousands. And so, but, we've actually intentionally kind of pumped the brakes on the student engagement side. I know that sounds, even here at Chaffey, there's some people that are frustrated with that. But it's because we've really wanted faculty to be at the forefront of the student experience, kind of like taking the influencer approach, right? Rather than coming out as like the big corporation with here's our marketing campaign, and shoving it down everybody's throat. Instead, make it grassroots, right? We make sure our systems are uniform, super streamlined, and the designs are wonderful. And we try to make sure there's as much automated connectivity to workforce and career skills and career building, but that at the end of the day, if the faculty are bought on, that's what moves product. Like if product is learning in our case, if the faculty are bought on, that's who touch the students more than anybody else, So I feel like sometimes colleges like split off into this career services marketing world where it's like disconnected from the classroom, and it never connects with the majority of students in any substantive way.
That's right.
And one thing I tell my students, and I put in the chat too, I really emphasize is outcomes first. But of course, I mentioned the credentials, but I tell them, the credential only matters as much as you make it. So you can earn this credential potentially in this course, let's say in innovation, but if you're not able to articulate, how you earned it and also how you can apply those skills from this class to, let's say, the workplace or to the university you're transferring to, it's not going to be as valuable. That's just the truth of it. And that's what employers have brought up as well. And so the credential is an indicator, but what it indicates are the actual outcomes and the skills. So I think that's why it needs to be emphasized first. And so I try to leave, room at the end of the semester, not just to give students a chance to review, the outcomes they've earned in that alignment tool, but also to reflect on it and explain maybe, like, again, how they would articulate and explain those outcomes if they were asked, let's say, in an interview or on their applications, which, are coming up soon for many of them. And that's really the key. And that's the connection that we've never I've never really had before to outcomes, because it was always done like externally, and students wouldn't see it and they wouldn't have access to that. And, there's never time to really talk about, let's say, soft skills or employability skills. So having it tied and embedded into the coursework, for me at least, kind of almost saves time, because I'm able to teach, the same assignments and assessments that I've always done, but it enables a conversation throughout the semester about those skills, about the ACEs, employability skills.
Wow. Okay, Matthew. Yes, I'm looking at those numbers here, and well, yeah, maybe we could talk a little bit about this, because it's true that whenever we talk about outcomes assessment in any context, it always amounts to one thing is accountability, the other one is extra work, and then there is the data, right? There's just so much of it. When it comes to grading, certificate or degree issuance, it's not a problem. That's what we do. I mean, we must, right? Why is this why those types of thinking so different, and how can you address that, in a sense that right, then the numbers are apparently staggering, but again, I don't know how large Chaffey is, but I'm sure that there's larger community colleges than yours, right, in California, let alone in the country. So again, how do we manage this? How do we reconcile the two? The grading as again, that's data, right? That's there are databases that are made for that, to keep track of students grading and diploma attainment. And then we have SLO assessment that's apparently creating other sets of numbers. Starting with philosophical differences between the two, how do you think you're going to manage this?
Data warehouse.
Extra money?
Yep. That
Got it.
way, if one of the questions you asked for, like, how to make these things work, I think if there's any administrators on the call who are like, this would be the direction I'd like to take the institution, there needs to be an administrator who has the ability to get money, to control budgets, who just is like so obsessively into this. Like, that's the key thing, is we have members of faculty, we have technicians like Trey, and administrators who just love this stuff. And so my job is on the money side a lot of the time. It's like trying to make sure we're clearing the way for, are all the resources that are needed to make sure that this happens.
Right. Yeah. Well, again, I'm just at awe at the outcome of your work. This is just amazing. Kudos to your team. Fantastic. Right on. So here we are. We are approaching almost 12 o'clock. Any questions? Any comments? Suggestions? Anyone else? Okay. So again. Go ahead, Lauren.
Sorry, I had a question I was typing, but I'll just say it instead.
Yes.
So I'm very interested in the ACEs side of things, and I work I'm adjunct faculty for Santa Ana College, and my full-time position outside of that is for a nonprofit organization that's a work training organization, and we look at what we call workforce readiness traits, and we look at accountability, initiative, productivity, grit, very much resonating with what you all have put in place here. And so I guess my question is, in application, do you have a recommendation of how many of the 12 ACEs to utilize throughout a semester, or is there best practices that have been recognized over time in terms of how many to use, or I guess most popular ones, to where we're not overwhelming students with them all at once?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's probably one of the top 3 questions faculty ask. We do have best practices. We have not set a maximum cap. We do have some faculty members who wish we would. We do have faculty reaching out. We have to put a max on, how many outcomes you can attach to a course. I don't fear and I don't believe, I have not encountered any faculty that are like attaching all 48 outcomes or attaching 10 to an assignment. When we provide training resources or workshops, you know, we really stress alignment. And part of alignment is that there isn't just, you know, one cut and dry number. So since we've been working on this for a couple of years, I'm always kind of pulling and asking faculty what that number is. And again, emphasizing alignment. And there has kind of been a number that's emerged, even though again we don't specify that you have to include this particular number, and it's usually adding anywhere from 1 to 4 outcomes to a particular assignment, and then a total of 1 to 4 assignments per semester, if that makes sense. So faculty members usually will attach it to anywhere from 1 to 4 assignments throughout the semester. Summative assessments are more popular, though, as I mentioned before, if you want students to be building those skills and being assessed in the same outcome multiple times, you might consider attaching it to the formative assessments as well. And typically, like I said, it's usually no more than 4 outcomes in a particular assignment. So like for me, I have 4 writing assignments. So in my English classes, so I'll add outcomes to those 4 writing assignments, anywhere from 1 to 4 outcomes per assignment. So that's been the range that I would say like 90% of faculty fall under. But yeah, that is a concern that's been raised multiple times. Should we set maximum? Should we tell faculty no more than this, you know, number of outcomes? And sometimes we get new faculty who look at the 48 and they go, oh my gosh, how am I going to integrate 48? And we're like, no, you don't, you shouldn't be integrating all 48 outcomes into a course. That would be chaos. So yeah, that is something we have conversations about and we have some best practices for, but we try not to keep it too restrictive or, you know, too didactic there.
I also just want to point out the paradigm shift because, again, back to tradition. I used to be a faculty assessment lead, and so I like lived in this world of like the assessment regime where you micromanage the assessment process so that every department has a signature assignment, and you determine on the front end from a top-down approach how many learning outcomes are going to be attached to that particular summative assessment, right? And if you think about it, that is partly where this question is coming from. Like, well, you know, you can't let the assessments go crazy, you know, because we need to control, right? We need to really know how many are we measuring what we're supposed to be measuring, right? That's been the culture of outcomes assessment. But actually, like, I think maybe we should break that and instead just let it go wild for a minute and see organically because what I love about the process that Laura's talking about is we're talking about best practices, but faculty can go bananas. They can attach 48 outcomes if they want to across all their courses. The reason why I think that's an important evolutionary step for us is then, at least on the back end, we have an honest reflection of what faculty believe they're teaching students. Instead of this like hyper-controlled micromanaging where we're saying students are learning X, but it actually isn't a reflection of what's happening across all adjuncts, all assignments, right? Instead, if we just let everyone attach whatever they think matters to all of their assignments, then we get an honest perspective, like a subjective perspective about what we say we're measuring. And we can work backwards from there. Then we can see, oh, like this, the department can look at their own data and say, oh my gosh, we're really flaring off in critical thinking. Like everyone's doing 100 assessments on critical thinking for everything, right? And then they know, okay, we seem to really think that's an important thing, but do we really want that to be the only thing we're talking about? Are we over assessing in that area? Are we overemphasizing it in our teaching and learning? Now we have like authentic conversations.
Thank you so much. Jarek, yes.
Yes. No, that's true. Spot on, Matthew. You know, the topic of you know, this part of academic freedom is yet another, you know, discussion, I suppose. That's another workshop, because it's you're absolutely right. We should be nimble. We should be responsive to what it is that students need to learn and what it is that faculty think that they need to learn. You know, those are not things that can be sort of you know, what is it? The cookie cutter solutions. We can't assign those things to the classrooms. And again, I imagine Laura is going to agree with this. So this is, but again, this is a topic for a much broader discussion. It's really sort of like, you know, the institution of the COR, you know, the course outline of record, you know, and other things that manage or attempt to structure what it is that we do in the classroom that come into play. Guys, fantastic. I'll let Enrique close it, but it's just been great. Really appreciate your work with us today.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for Chaffey College, all your wonderful work that you're doing. I really enjoy this grads roots, you know, type of conversations that are deeply, you know, deeply learning for everyone. So I thank you so much to all of you and the attendees. Thank you. We're at the end of the session. We're at 12 o'clock, and see you next Friday. Thank you.